If you've ever had to choose between the life you were handed and the one you actually wanted, stay with this one to the end. The lights die first, then the screaming starts. And Somi doesn't remember deciding to run. 1 second, she's standing under a chandelier the size of a small car, champagne flute halfway to her mouth, half listening to a shareholder's wife describes her daughter's Ivy League acceptance for the third time that evening. The next second, the ballroom goes black, glass shatters somewhere behind her, and 300 of Seoul's wealthiest guests turn into water, finding a crack to run through. Her heel catches the hem of her gown. She goes down hard on one knee, and for a long, ugly second, nobody around her stops. Nobody even looks down. A woman in emerald silk steps directly over her, heels clattering, eyes fixed on the exit sign glowing red through the smoke haze near the ceiling. Somi's palms hit marble. Somewhere above her, a chandelier crystal drops and shatters 6 feet away, and the sound of it, sharp, final, is what finally gets her moving again. Then a hand closes around her wrist, not gentle, fast. Move, move. She's hauled sideways, out of the current of bodies, through a service door that smells like garlic, char, and something warm and unfamiliar underneath it. Steel prep tables. Emergency lighting bleeding amber across the room. Her chest is heaving so hard she can taste metal in the back of her throat. The man who pulled her through the door isn't even looking at her yet. He's already crouched at a gas valve, hands steady, checking the line by feel in the dark like he's done it 100 times before because she'll learn later he has. "You're bleeding," he says, not turning around. "I what?" She looks down. A thin red line at her knee, torn stocking, silk gone dark at the hem. "Sit," he says it like a fact, not a request. When she doesn't move, he glances up, really looks at her for the first time, and something in his face shifts half a degree, softens just slightly at the edges. "I'm not going to bite you. I have a first aid kit and a burnt tray of jollof rice and frankly, not the energy for anything else tonight." She sits. "Quick gut check before we go further. Would you have run toward the stranger or back toward the exit everyone else took? Drop your answer below. I want to know if I'm the only one who'd have picked the kitchen. Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel." His name is Quame. He kneels and presses a clean cloth to her knee, brisk, impersonal, the way someone does a task they've repeated so often it no longer requires thought. "You're the one whose face is on every bus stop in Gangnam," he says. "That obvious? Your dress costs more than my restaurant's fire insurance." A small, unwilling smile. "Guessing you didn't plan on spending tonight in a kitchen tent." "I didn't plan on tonight at all," she says, and it comes out more honest than she meant it to. He doesn't ask what she means. He just nods once, like he understood something underneath the words anyway, and goes back to checking the line. Outside, the emergency lights hum back to life one section at a time. Security radios crackle through the thin canvas wall. Somebody is already calling it an electrical fault, already smoothing the story down into something forgettable before the guests have even finished filing back inside. Somi will find out later, much later, when it's far too late to matter, that the maintenance contract for that ballroom traces back to a company her own fiancé's family control. But tonight, she doesn't know that yet. Tonight, all she knows is a stranger's careful hands, the smell of spices she can't name, and the strange, guilty relief of not being looked at like a headline for exactly 11 minutes. By the time the power returns, and the guests are herded back for the chairman's closing remarks, Somi has changed into a borrowed staff jacket 2 sizes too big, and nobody recognizes her until she's standing beside her father again. He doesn't ask if she's hurt. "Where were you?" he says, smiling for the cameras, his voice pitched low enough that only she can hear the edge underneath it. "The kitchen tent. There was a blackout after I could have." "With who?" The question lands like something already decided, already halfway to a verdict. Her cousin Jaya's hand finds hers at her side, a small, steadying pressure that says breathe. "A chef," Somi says. "He helped me, that's all that happened." Her father says nothing else that night. He simply studies her for a moment too long, the way he studies a quarterly report that doesn't add up, before turning back to the cameras with his practiced, unbothered smile. 2 nights later, over a dinner neither of them touches, he sets down his chopsticks and tells her the wedding to Kang Tae-min has moved up. 6 weeks, not 6 months. Why? She asks, though she already knows the shape of the answer waiting underneath the question. Because I need this family settled, he says, before anything else gets complicated. She goes to bed that night with his words circling her head like a countdown clock she never agreed to set. And for the first time in years, she lies awake doing the math on exactly how much of her life she's spent agreeing to things nobody actually asked her opinion on. Here's the thing about arranged timelines, they're never really about the wedding. They're about control. Comment 6 weeks if you've ever felt a deadline get shorter the second you started wanting something different. She tells herself she's only going back to return the borrowed jacket. She tells herself this in the taxi, and again standing outside the restaurant door, half Hangul, half Twi gold letters catching the late afternoon light, and one more time as she pushes it open, and the smell of roasted pepper and doenjang hits her at once, somehow, impossibly, working together instead of against each other. Quaim is behind the counter, laughing at something with a line cook, sleeves shoved up, flour dusted along one forearm. When he sees her, the laugh doesn't stop so much as change shape. You came to return a jacket, he says, or you came because you were curious what a place that shouldn't work tastes like. Can it be both? It can. He nods toward a stool at the counter. Sit, I'm making you something, you don't get a say in it. She doesn't argue. She watches his hands instead, sure, unhurried, unbothered by who she is in a way almost nobody in her life manages to be anymore. Around them, the small restaurant hums with its own quiet rhythm. A radio playing highlife under the clatter of pans. A framed photograph behind the register of a woman with Quaim's exact smile, standing in front of a market stall somewhere that isn't Seoul. When he sets a bowl in front of her, jollof rice folded through with gochujang and roasted sesame. A dish that doesn't have a name yet, she finally asks the question she's been circling for a week. Why here? Why Seoul, of all places, to build this? Something crosses his face, brief, guarded, there and gone. My mother worked here once, a long time ago. I grew up half in Accra, half inside the stories she told about this city. He pauses, jaw tightening a fraction, eyes flicking toward the photograph behind the register. Some of them good, some she never finished telling. Somi feels something cold move through her chest, though she doesn't understand why yet, only that the unfinished shape of his sentence has landed somewhere she recognizes. Jaya finds it by accident, 3 floors below the executive suites, in a filing cabinet nobody has opened since the company digitized its records a decade ago. She's only down there hunting for an old vendor contract, cross-referencing a supply chain audit that isn't even her job, when her fingers catch on a folder marked personnel, terminated, pre-2000. An employment termination form, dated decades back, the name blacked out in the copy that made it into public archives, but clearly legible here, in the original. Domestic staff, terminated, theft, unsubstantiated. She stares at the surname for a long moment before it clicks, before she remembers the restaurant sign Somi described last week, half in Twi, half in Hangul, and her stomach drops straight through the floor. Her hands are shaking as she photographs the page. For a moment, she almost doesn't send it. She thinks about the version of this where she puts the folder back, forgets she ever saw it, keeps her job and her uncle's approval, and the quiet, comfortable life she's built out of never asking hard questions. Then she thinks about Somi's face at every family dinner for the last 10 years, and she sends it anyway. You need to see this before you fall any further. I think I know why Uncle hates the name, Boteng. This is the part where most stories would have someone yell and slam a door. This one doesn't. Real family secrets are quieter than that, and somehow worse. If you've ever had to decide whether to hand someone a truth that'll hurt them, tell me what you'd have done. Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Somi finds her father alone, by the koi pond that night. The way he always is when something is eating at him from the inside out. Ajoa Boteng, she says, no preamble. You fired her for something she didn't do. Her father goes very still, his reflection breaking apart in the dark water. Where did you hear that name? Does it matter? Tell me it isn't true. A long silence stretches between them, longer than she expects. When he finally speaks, the boardroom edge has gone out of his voice completely, replaced by something rawer, older. My brother stole from this house. I was 28, terrified of what the truth would do to us if it ever got out, and she was. He stops. Starts again, quieter. She was convenient, foreign, no family here to fight for her, no lawyer, no leverage. I've spent 30 years building something so large that no one could ever ask me about it again. And here you are, asking anyway. Her son runs a restaurant 2 neighborhoods from here, Appa. He doesn't even know why she never talks about this city. Her father's face does something complicated, grief wearing the mask of anger, because anger is the only expression he's had 30 years of practice using. Then let it stay buried. I can't, Somi says, because I think I'm in love with him. Her father doesn't answer. He simply turns back toward the water, and Somi walks away wondering if she just broke something in him that was never going to hold much longer anyway. Kang Taemin doesn't mean for it to happen the way it does. He tells himself that later, over and over, until it almost sounds true. He'd hired someone to quietly watch Somi. Not out of jealousy, he insists to himself, just due diligence. Because if this merger collapses, his father loses the company his own grandfather built from a single textile shop after the war. Taemin has grown up hearing that story at every family dinner, has watched his father's hands shake a little more each year, the debt collector's calls get closer, and has quietly decided, without ever saying it out loud, that his own happiness is a luxury the family budget can't currently afford. When the photographs land on his desk, Somi laughing outside a restaurant with gold and Hangul signage, a man's hand resting at the small of her back. Something in his chest turns cold and businesslike at the same time, the way it does whenever a deal starts slipping through his fingers. I don't want to do this, he tells his assistant, staring at the images for a long time. But 2 days later, the photos are sitting on a tabloid editor's desk anyway, delivered by a courier who doesn't know what's inside the envelope. He tells himself it's a warning shot, nothing more, a pressure valve, something to bring Somi back to the table before the wedding date collapses entirely. He doesn't tell himself the uglier truth underneath it, that some small, ashamed part of him wants her to hurt exactly as much as he's hurting, wants her to understand what it feels like to have your future decided by people who never once asked what you wanted. Twist incoming. If you thought Taemin was just going to be the disposable bad fiancé, hold that thought. Nobody in this story is only one thing. The restaurant is closed for the night, chairs stacked, the open sign flipped dark. Quaim is cooking for exactly one person, and Somi sits at the counter watching him the way she hasn't let herself watch anyone in years, without calculating what it might cost her later. My mother used to say Seoul broke her heart twice, he says, plating something slowly and deliberately, more carefully than the dish requires. Once when she lost the only job that let her send money home to my grandmother, and once when she realized, years later, that she loved the city anyway, despite everything it took from her. I know why she lost that job, Somi says quietly. His hands stop moving completely. She tells him everything, the file, her father, the theft that wasn't her fault, 30 years of silence dressed up as pride and legacy. He listens without interrupting, jaw tightening once, twice, knuckles whitening slightly around the edge of the counter. When she finishes, he sets the knife down very carefully, like he doesn't trust his own hands right now. All this time, he says, I thought she just didn't want to talk about it. I never once thought to ask what it cost her to stay quiet. I'm sorry, I should have told you the second I knew. No, he exhales, long and unsteady, and finally looks at her again. I'm glad it was you who told me, and not some article, not some stranger. I don't know how to hold this and hold what I feel for you at the same time. They're tangled up in the same family, the same history. Then untangle them with me, Somi says. Don't untangle us. For a long moment, neither of them moves. Then he crosses the small kitchen and takes her face in both hands, flour still faint on his fingers, and kisses her like he's been rehearsing a question for weeks, and this is finally the only answer that makes any sense. The alert comes at 11:47 p.m. Han Cosmetics Heiress's secret romance, days before her wedding. The photo is grainy, taken from across the street through a rain-spotted lens, but it's unmistakably them. Somi's phone doesn't stop buzzing for the next 40 minutes. Jaya, her father's assistant, a dozen unknown numbers, a voicemail from a reporter she's never spoken to in her life, using her first name like they're old friends. Somewhere in the flood, one message from T-Min, sent at 12:03 a.m., 3 lines long. I'm sorry. I panicked. Please believe that much is true, even if nothing else about tonight makes sense to you. She sits on the floor of her apartment, back against the bed, phone glowing in the dark, and for the first time in her adult life, she doesn't reach for an apology of her own. She just sits with it, the fear, the exposure, the strange, quiet certainty underneath all of it that she isn't sorry for the part that actually matters. By morning, an entire country will have an opinion about a story that isn't theirs to have one about. If you've ever had something private turned into a headline, you already know exactly what the next 12 hours feel like. The boardroom is full by 9 the next morning. Every seat taken, latecomers standing along the back wall, the stock ticker already sliding red on the screen behind the chairman's podium. Somi stands near the back in a plain gray suit, instead of anything designed for cameras, watching her father grip the podium like it's the only thing keeping him upright. There have been questions, he begins, voice steady in the way that costs him visible effort, about my daughter's personal conduct. Appa, her voice isn't loud, but it cuts through the room anyway. Every head turns. Let me. Her father hesitates. A full 3 seconds that feel like an hour, his hand still resting on the podium's edge. Then, for the first time in her life, he steps back and lets her take it. Her hands are shaking as she climbs the 2 low steps. She lets them shake. My name has been attached to this brand since I was 6 years old, she says. I've spent my entire life being whatever this company needed me to be at any given moment. So I understand, better than anyone in this room, how frightening it feels when the image doesn't match the plan. She finds Jaya in the crowd, finds the small nod that says keep going. But I'm not going to apologize for loving someone whose only real crime, in this family's eyes, is a history we buried instead of made right. My father fired a woman 30 years ago for a theft his own brother committed. That woman's son is the man in that photograph everyone's been passing around since midnight. I would rather this company survive one difficult headline than keep surviving on 30 more years of silence. A murmur moves through the room. One older board member half rises from his seat, says something about brand integrity that Somi doesn't bother answering directly. If the board wants a chairman's daughter who performs a life for the cameras, she says instead, I'm not her anymore. If you want one who tells the truth even when it costs her something, I'm still standing right here. The room doesn't move for a long moment. Near the front, her father's face runs through something shock, shame, something close to relief, and finally settles into stillness. Quaim is waiting outside when she comes down, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who drove faster than he should have to get there. I saw the clip, he says. It's everywhere already. I know. Are you okay? She thinks about it, really thinks, instead of reaching for the automatic apology that used to live in her mouth by default. I think I'm the most okay I've been in years. Her father appears in the doorway behind her, alone, no assistants trailing him for once. He looks at Quaim for a long moment, searching, maybe, for the ghost of a woman he wronged 3 decades earlier, and then does something none of them expect. He bows, not the shallow, practiced bow of business meetings. A full, low bow held for several seconds, the kind reserved for a real apology. Tell your mother, he says, voice rough, that I would like the chance to say I'm sorry, in person, whenever she's willing to hear it if she's ever willing at all. Quaim doesn't answer right away. Something old and heavy shifts in his shoulders, not forgiveness yet, not quite, but the door to it, cracked open for the first time in 3 decades. I'll ask her, he says finally. That's all I can promise today. Adjoa Boateng is 71 years old and has outlived every version of Chairman Han she used to imagine confronting in her head at 3 a.m., decades ago, back when the wound was still new enough to keep her awake. When he actually appears at her door, 3 weeks after the boardroom clip finishes its run through every news cycle in the country, she almost doesn't let him in. She does anyway. He sits at her kitchen table, small, scarred with decades of use, nothing like the marble surfaces in his own home, and he doesn't perform an apology the way he's watched men in his position perform them for cameras 100 times before. He simply tells her the truth, plainly, the way he should have 30 years ago. His brother stole from him, and rather than face what that meant about his own family, he let her carry the blame instead. Adjoa listens with her hands folded, saying nothing for a long time. "I lost 4 months of income," she finally says, "and my reference for every job after. Do you know what that does to a woman with a child in a country that already looks at her twice?" "I don't," he admits. "I never let myself think about it long enough to know." She studies him for a long moment, something unreadable crossing her face. "I'm not going to tell you it's forgiven, not today." A pause. "But you came. That's more than I expected from you 30 years ago." It isn't peace, not yet. But it's a door left open instead of slammed shut, and for now, that's enough for both of them to walk through separately in their own time. The restaurant is full for once. A real crowd, Korean and Ghanaian dishes, sitting side by side on the same menu without apologizing for either. Somi ties an apron over her plain clothes and takes orders at table 6 like it's the most natural thing she's ever done with her hands. Jaya stops by most Fridays now, sketchbook in hand, finally drawing again after years of telling herself there wasn't time. T-Min sends one final message that autumn. No apology this time, just a photo of his own restaurant's soft opening, a small noodle shop with his grandmother's name above the door, nothing to do with the family company at all. Somi reads it twice and finds, to her own surprise, that she's genuinely glad for him. Later, after close, she and Quaim sit on the back steps, the city humming low around them, the smell of the day's cooking still clinging to both their clothes. "My father asked today if I regret losing the merger," she says. "What do you tell him?" "That I didn't lose anything. I finally chose something." Quaim laughs, low and warm, and takes her hand. No calculation in it, no cameras, no version of herself she has to perform for anyone in this particular moment. Just her, sitting on a set of concrete steps that mean more to her than any ballroom ever did. Was it the scandal that finally set her free? Or the truth underneath it, the one that had been waiting 30 years for someone brave enough to finally say it out loud? If this story stayed with you, that's the whole point. Some family honor is just old shame wearing a nicer name. Tell me in the comments, would you have taken the podium or stayed quiet to keep the peace? Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more beautiful videos. Thank you for watching. The end.